So excited.
I'm excited, man. I like this kind of stuff,
Well, we start by saying night school,
Night school?
and then we talk about the book.
Okay.
So we read Disappearance of the Universe by
Yes.
Gary Renard.
Yep.
And I'll give my summary, and then you can add whatever you want, and then we can talk about what we loved about it.
Sounds good.
So it was written by Gary Renard, who I'm going to explain everything as though it's real, because the information in it was so compelling and relevant that I assume the story is real. To anyone who doubts the details, just consider that creative fiction to make a great point.
Yeah.
So Gary Renard is visited by two beautiful people who materialize spontaneously in his home.
Yep.
Their names are Arten and Pursah. They claim to be completely enlightened and transcended and wanting to teach him. They teach him that Jesus recently channeled a course called A Course in Miracles, that it's authentic, and that its basic premise is that the universe does not exist, and that only God, only reality, only heaven exists. And that singularity of self-sustaining awareness and perfect love is the only thing that's real.
Right.
And that forgiveness is the method of awakening to what's real. And that Gary is the reincarnation of the Apostle Thomas, and that A Course in Miracles is a modern course that actually makes the point that the Book of Thomas intended to make. Right. That the Book of Thomas is, it has that idea in it, but it doesn't present it in a way that really allows you to walk it out and live it, and A Course in Miracles does.
Right.
And yeah, what else for just summarizing what the book was?
Well, with the course of, or with the Book of Thomas, it was, back when 2,000 years ago, they didn't have enough information, right? They weren't as far along in their lessons of forgiveness and their lessons of to really be able to kind of put it out there like that, and that's what it is supposed to be now, right? Is like after living so many lives and learning so many lessons and the forgiveness and things like that, like they couldn't have possibly put it out there like it is in the Course in Miracles. And with the Disappearance of the Universe, like you were saying, about it being, taking it as fiction, like after reading the book, it is so hard to say that it's not real. Like to make up a story like that is, it's impressive. It would be a very impressive feat, to say the least,
Gary isn't capable of it.
Right.
There's no way.
I don't know if anybody is really, like that's a maybe, but yeah.
I read one of the blog posts that he posted recently.
Yeah.
He was defending his book against somebody who had attacked it, and he sounded petulant. He sounded reactive.
Yeah.
And after I read that, I was like, well, the book's definitely real, because
right.
This guy did not.
Word.
This guy did not fictionalize these two characters and say everything that they said. There's no
Absolutely.
way. He was trying to respond by saying essentially, I'm not trying to defend myself or my book. I'm just explaining why, because somebody had written this other corny blog article about all the reasons that the Disappearance of the Universe was not legitimate,
right.
and that the Ascended Masters visiting him was not real, and
right.
A Course in Miracles sucks, and blah, blah, blah. So he wrote a lengthy, wordy response on his own blog.
Yeah.
And he says, he reiterates throughout it, and I'm not defending myself because I am not real, and I'm not defending the Course because none of this is real anyway. And it's such a corny way to use that idea,
right?
Not to grow in unconditional love, but he's using the idea that his ego is not real to defend his ego. And as I'm reading this, I'm like, this guy did not write Disappearance of the Universe.
Right,
Like, he compiled it, but no way.
But the information came from those two.
Yeah.
Like, it was incredibly compelling, like you said. Like, yeah, and that's a good kind of point to bring up, where it talks about the nothing being real, right? How that's a super difficult thing to get through your head, but the Buddhists even talk about it. Like, that's one of the main points in Buddhism when you first start to learn, is that none of this reality means anything. It doesn't intrinsically, like this table doesn't intrinsically hold the value of a table. It is a table because we have projected that meaning onto it, right? But the Disappearance of the Universe and Course in Miracles goes so much deeper into that, where everyone is just a projection of the single ego that broke away from God. And that is very difficult to understand and see, like, Yeah. Yeah.
So how, as somebody who appreciated this book, I want to get your perspective on how is that idea relevant to a well-adjusted and successful life? Like, how do you apply that in a way that's functional? You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's hard without like destroying your life, because as I'm reading this book, I was like, oh man, nothing means anything.
Right.
I should just give up everything and like, I'm going to go and be a bum on the street and meditate all the time, or whatever. But then it applies as in like, yes, this realm, we do live through it, right? But it's not that nothing matters, because that's so like nihilistic. The nothing matters thing. For me, it was like, oh, I have to give up all the things that I want. Like, I want to move to this place, or I want to go here. I want to do this. I want to do this. But it's just understanding that those are a projection for us to eventually learn the things that we need to learn our forgiveness lessons, to bring us back to forgiveness, to like take us to where we need to be. Really,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it's a hard concept to wrap around and say, oh, this is why, or this is what it is in my life right now. But it helps understanding that there is something higher, that the real universe is here, and that the ego projection is here. And it's kind of true.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if you have synchronicities, or you have all these things, like my life, I know I've had tons of synchronicities where it's like somebody else is writing this story, and it's not somebody else, it's like my own projection, right? And I think about something, it happens, or I need this to happen, and it happens.
Mm-hmm.
It just makes so much sense that it comes from here. Like the ego, well, I guess I don't know where the ego's at in this body, but it comes from the ego and just projects outward, because it's like, yeah. And it's hard because I've lived my life by those things, and it says in the book, like, forgive yourself for wanting those things. It's okay. Like, you are the projection of your ego. You can't get away from it. So you have to forgive yourself in order to move through it, right? And get to the other side. Like, it's not going to be a magic fix.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the biggest thing, probably, is that there's no one magic fix for us, right? It's not like, oh, if I forgive this one thing, I'm all of a sudden enlightened. Nothing else matters. I don't have to do anything. I'm with God, because regardless, we're stuck in this projection realm.
Right.
Right. So it's, just kind of getting to it.
The main thing that Arten and Pursah praise Gary for as they visit, because I think it was 14 visits over 9 years.
17
visits over
9 years.
Over 9 years. Yep. And he always wants praise for things like, oh, I haven't been drinking as much, things like that. The only praise that they consistently give him is, you're forgiving more.
Yeah.
And they'll tell him, like, you're winning the game because you always forgive. You don't forgive immediately.
Right.
But when something comes up that you could apply forgiveness to, you always come around to it eventually.
Right.
And as I thought about how to apply that in my life, and as I talked to other people about forgiveness while I was reading the book and going through the course and doing the exercises, I realized that all forgiveness is, or virtually all forgiveness is transactional or conditional, or it's a form of justification.
Yeah.
So someone will be saying, for example, I'm really having trouble forgiving this person. And then you'll say, you'll start asking questions about what would make you able to forgive that person, what's stopping you from forgiving that person. And then they'll act like they've gotten around to forgiveness by saying something like, well, they only did that because X and Y happened to them.
Right.
Or they may have done that, but it ended up working out in my favor because something good happened to me.
Right.
Or they did that, but I'm just more focused on something else, and something bad is going to happen to them because they did that. So there's always that person is justified on some level in doing what they did to me, or I benefited from it in some way, so therefore I can forgive. And what Arten and Pursah were teaching Gary was that if you forgive things based on the fact that they don't have existence, it's like when you wake up from a dream, it's not like you didn't have the experience of whatever bad thing happened to you in the dream.
Right.
But if you're reasonably well adjusted, you don't blame the person who wronged you in the dream once you wake up. You go, okay, that was a dream.
Yeah, you don't stay attached to it. You
Right.
don't stay attached to the dream, what's in the dream. And that's what basically what we're in, right, is a dream. That's kind of how they explained it. Yeah.
Right. So that's the thing about the holographic theory in the book that was most actionable to me was, okay, what if I practiced forgiving people on the basis that them and me and the thing that happened isn't real? Because they repeatedly emphasize that the Holy Spirit's brand of forgiveness is it never happened. That's why you forgive it. You forgive it because it never happened. And those things are, it's really hard to admit that something isn't real if you really want it,
right,
or if you're really angry about it.
Right.
And so when those things come up, we can practice going, no, this isn't real. Not this. For now, we say this isn't real in a fundamental sense. It just seems real for now.
Right.
Eventually, we say, I know that this doesn't exist in the first place. And the reason that ended up making sense to me is the way that they break down the fall story. It makes so many things click more than the other one. Because the old version of the fall story is that humans existed, but were in constant communion with God.
Right.
And then chose to break that communion.
Right.
And then God punished them for doing that.
Right.
And there's a lot of holes in that story.
Yeah.
Which I won't go into because I think that the other one clears them up.
Yeah.
The fall story that Disappearance of the Universe and A Course in Miracles presents is there was no separate objects or subjects in existence. There was only the perfect love, singularity of ultimate reality in eternity.
Right.
That was it.
Right.
And then it was, because now we want to characterize it conceptually, you could say the source and creation, which was just a perfect reflection of the source because they were one thing.
Right.
In the mind aspect of that, there was momentarily entertained the idea that separation could occur. And we live in the momentary idea that separation could occur.
Right.
Not in any fundamental reality.
But that momentary time, it was just an instant in time because it's like the bit of creation turned away and then realized, oh, okay, I got to turn back.
Right.
But that was in God's time, or in, it's just a tiny instant. And so it's like that everywhere, the movie Everywhere, all
Everything,
at once.
Everywhere, All at
Everything,
Once.
everywhere, all at once. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's that kind of concept where everything is happening at that same time because we are in that instant. Like everything that's going to happen to me in my future life or in my past lives or in right now that's happened to me just in this life, in my future and my past has already happened.
Right.
And that's another way that's helped me a little bit of like, okay, everything has already happened. Like everything has already happened, so why do I have to attach to this moment right now? Why can't I just be here in this moment instead of attaching to all the emotions that I'm attaching that I would normally attach to?
Right. And I think when you said not attached to this moment, instead be here in this moment, the first was a lowercase m moment.
Right.
As in an iteration in some linear time scale from some perceived past to some perceived future. The other one was be present in the eternal moment as though it's not fleeting.
Right.
It's always here.
Exactly. Yeah. That's exactly right, what I was saying.
And the old fall story does depend on linear time.
Yeah.
The old fall story says, well, in the past, human beings were perfect.
Right.
Then they decided not to be, so we still aren't. But we had one perfect person who taught us how to be perfect.
Right.
But we'll never actually get there. But we should strive for it. And as long as we try, we'll be forgiven when we die.
Yeah.
There's so many holes and the idea that God had to sacrifice the only perfect person in order to appease a debt that he was upholding in the first place.
Right.
There's so many holes in that story.
And whereas God is perfect love, and the ego is what caused that. Like that was a big difference to me too, was that, God is perfect love and wouldn't do any of those things. It doesn't, it's not going to be like, hey, you're messing up, I'm going to punish you. That's the ego. We're always punishing ourselves for turning away initially, right?
Yeah.
And you say the fall story, and we had talked about this before, but it's like fractals. Every story is, fractals, because you have the fall of Satan, right? And it's essentially the same story. You have the fall of Eve, Adam and Eve, but then we also have the prodigal son, and I really liked how in that they iterated how it's just like that, right? The prodigal son goes away, squanders his father's riches, blah, 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 blah. He expects his father to treat him like dirt when he turns back to him, but the father doesn't treat him like dirt. He's like, no, come on, you are my son, you are everything, like we are, it's okay. It's okay, I love you still. And that's how it is with this, and I thought that was such a poignant representation of it, because we're always so scared, like, oh no, my dad's going to be mad at me. you know, like, oh man. But
Because
in reality, it's
when we
not
reach that point where we're face to face with our source again,
Yeah.
the response won't be, "Oh, you finally made it back," as though God is subject to linear time. Like,
Right.
"Oh, now you're here."
Yeah.
It'll just be, "Here we are. You never left.
Right.
Here we are. You never left. That was
Yep.
a dream. That never had any substance to it."
Exactly.
And it was Pursah. Pursah was one of the two. So Arten and Pursah.
Yeah.
Pursah is the ascended version of the soul who was the Apostle Thomas,
Right.
who is now Gary Renard, but in a split reincarnation. Did you read about that?
Yeah. Yeah. It was hard.
Like a Hawaiian dude?
Are you talking about the ancient guy?
No, I'm talking
no.
about Gary Renard currently. This is on a different website that
Okay,
isn't
I
in this
hadn't
train
read
of
about
thought,
that, yeah.
But so there's a past life regressionist who does research on past lives, obviously.
Right.
And she discovered that Gary Renard and this Hawaiian dude were the same soul in a double incarnation.
Right.
And they've met each other. Actually, the other one was the officiant for Gary's wedding.
Oh,
And they look absolutely identical.
interesting.
They have that same exact pudgy, square,
Yeah.
happy face.
Yeah.
And I looked up pictures of the Apostle Thomas, like ancient paintings from Orthodox churches.
Yeah.
They totally depict that pudgy, square face. Which is so
Interesting.
interesting. Yeah.
That is interesting.
But Pursah, as that ascended version, she said that when she wrote the Book of Thomas, she didn't get to finish it because she was beheaded in India as Thomas.
Right.
But that she wanted to end the Book of Thomas with the prodigal son story, and that was her favorite Jesus story.
Right. Yeah. That's right. It was her favorite Jesus story because it was, it's just the perfect representation of, we turned away, but it's okay. Like that instant of time, like we don't have to attach to that instant of time because it's not there. That anger, that projected anger from humans onto God is not there. It's our own ego. It's our own anger. It's our own self-loathing style of life, right? That is so popular.
Yeah.
That's just how we are. We're humans. We're ego. We are ego, right? And that's the whole point is letting go of that attachment there. Yeah.
Most people who, when I say most people, I'm talking about me and you and everybody.
Right.
When we have unforgiveness, we are actively pretending that whatever we have unforgiveness towards is happening to us. Even if it happened in the past, we're pretending that it's happening right now.
Yeah, we can't make that separation, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So if I'm I was in a bad mood today. What was it? Yeah, I was mad at somebody, too personal to go into, but I was mad at somebody from the past today, and I was having an argument with them in my head while I was cooking, like 10 minutes before you came over.
Yeah.
And then I stopped and I did I'm working through A Course in Miracles, and it gives you thought exercises every day. They take about a minute. You do them for like 4 or 5 times per day. So I was like, I'll do it. And it happened to be a really relevant one. Because the idea to apply for today was, I look out at the world and I think the world is. So I think the world is unfair. I think the world is betraying me. I think the world can't be trusted. I think the world is broken. I think the world is all the things, however you're characterizing the world. And then at the end you say, but I'm upset because I see a meaningless world. And the purpose of the exercise is to notice that our obsession with making meaning is caused by our unconscious realization that the world we projected is not meaningful.
Right.
Because the real reality outside of this one or within this one, whatever, that is actually rich in meaning isn't a place where you have to make meaning. It's not a place where you have to figure out what's meaningful or try to see the meaning in things. It is just meaningful. It's full of meaning. It's like, this isn't meaningful, but this is.
Right.
This book isn't meaningful, but this is. This relationship wasn't meaningful, but this one was.
Right.
And so the exercise is about noticing that. The reason I'm upset is not because I projected this on the world, projected that on the world. The reason I'm upset is because the world is meaningless and I'm not willing to accept that it is. Because I want to keep up this game.
Right.
Because as soon as... And I've started to notice more and more that when I make a stupid decision in my life, I always make 1,000 more stupid decisions to justify the first one.
Yeah.
And the purpose of the exercises in the course is to undo those false choices one by one, systematically,
Yeah.
the way we think about God, the way we think about ourselves, the way that we think about love, the way we think about relationships,
Right.
undo the lies in each one of those systematically until we're willing to, and the 365th exercise is called choose once again.
Yeah. Right.
Until we're willing to make the original choice differently.
Yeah.
And the original choice was to entertain the idea of separation. The next one was to assume that there was something dangerous or scary about God.
Right.
So when religious people today say God is to be feared,
Right.
as though that's a higher priority than loving God, it's a modern iteration of that same original mistake.
Yeah.
Like, well, the reason I turned away from God is because he's scary.
Yeah.
Because he's going to punish me, because
Right.
he's bad, because blah, 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 blah. And then every single mistake.
My father's
followed
going to be angry that I spent all his money and didn't do anything with it and didn't do
Right.
anything with my life. Right. Yeah. It's the
Right.
same. Yeah.
And so to go back, when I'm cooking, before I do the exercise, I'm cooking and I'm having an argument with someone who doesn't exist. Because I'm not even arguing with the person. I'm arguing with my idea of what the person might say.
Right.
Worst case scenario.
Making up a conversation in your head for them that you're then making up another conversation.
Yeah, and I was
to.
winning too. They looked really stupid.
Right. Yeah. It's always that way, right? Yeah.
How smart I am.
Yeah. Right.
And so when we have unforgiveness and we feel stress or we feel anger or we feel tension, whatever you want to feel, about the fact that something happened in the past which you could potentially hold unforgiveness towards, it's easy to notice that we are projecting that.
Yeah.
Like, oh, okay, yeah, the person who I'm arguing with in my head, I'm not really arguing with.
Right.
And the character that I'm picturing in my head is not the actual person.
Right.
We can notice that level. But then the Course and Disappearance of the Universe to say, now notice the next level. The actual human being that you had the conflict with in the first place is so much more complex than what you perceived when you looked at them.
Yeah.
That you were having conflict with a fictional character even when they were standing in the room.
Right.
And then one step further, the separation between you and that person is the result of the original lie
Right.
that we collectively made up,
Right.
which was that there is a such thing as separation.
That there's a separation between us and God. And yeah, that's
Right.
a thing that's also kind of hard to grasp when diving into this is the speciality, right? Like there's no more speciality about this person than there is about this person, or like, you know, how in mainstream Christianity, Jesus's body is what is special, and it's more special than anybody else's body that there is, but that's just not the truth. And that's hard to kind of wrap your head around too, especially for somebody like me. I've like struggled with like, oh, I'm so special, you know, like I'm this, that, and the other.
Right, same.
You know, but realizing like that we're not, and there isn't a speciality. We all have the same ability and capability within ourselves. Mm-hmm. You know, some might be blocked by more forgiveness lessons than others and things like that, but we all have that ability to do what Jesus did, which is forgive, even on the smallest level. And that's where this book is super cool. Like it's helped. Even the example of him driving in the car, you know, and I've been really conscious of myself for a while now. I used to get super bad road rage, you know, and I'm like, you know, 10 years ago, 12 years ago, flipping people off or screaming at people, punching the steering wheel, you know, like, ah. And I was like, well, that's not helping anybody. But, you know, so back then I was like, okay, I'm going to stop doing these things and stop, you know, but even still, like you find yourself cussing them out in your head, even if you're not like, even if I'm not like outwardly acting it like as bad as I used to.
Yeah.
Like, oh, look at this guy, thinks he's special, blah, 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 blah. You know, it's like, oh, it's okay. It's just a projection of my impatientness, right? Like if this guy cuts me off, it's a projection of my own impatience. Mm-hmm. That's cutting me off. Okay, cool, whatever. All right, I'm on with my day, you know. Like,
right.
And then it allows us to put ourselves into that person's shoes pretty easily if we just think about it in that way. Like, oh, that's a projection of my impatience because right now I'm in a hurry to get to work. So there it is right in front of me. Boom, the ego doing what the ego does, which is taking what we... I don't know the word for it, but what we just like go crazy over in our own brains and putting it out into the universe. And it's like right there in front of us. Yeah. And just that ability to be like, no, okay, I'm impatient. There it is. There's the example of it. I forgive that person. Therefore, I forgive myself. I forgive us.
Yeah.
You know, yeah, and that those little bits of forgiveness, those are what lead us to enlightenment eventually. Like I said earlier, it's not like a magic trick. We're going to be like, boom, I'm enlightened. Yeah. But as it goes on, as time goes on, as we choose forgiveness or the Holy Spirit, as the book says, you know, which they used traditional Christian language, right, just to kind of get it out. But in that song that I wrote the other day, I said the Great Spirit. You know, it's all the same. Like, it's there, and it's the Spirit that allows us to choose the forgiveness versus choosing our attachment to our emotions and the ego and the attachment to the separation, because we're attached to that separation. It's weird, you know, like we're like, oh man, I am different than you and you are different than me, and in some way I'm better than you or you're better than me or this, that, and the other, when in reality we're all the same projection.
The Course's train of thought says that the times where we notice that we're better at something than another person and the times where we notice that somebody's better at something than we are, we're not playing two opposing games there. We're playing the exact same game with our left hand and our right hand.
Right.
Because whether we are extremely happy and we can prop ourselves over somebody else and say, look, I got the trophy, or whether we can say, I lost the game and it was somebody's fault and I'm so sad.
Right.
Either way, they're just different flavors of ways to play the same game, which is we're all so separate. Because if it was all peace and everybody tied, then we wouldn't be able to play the game anymore.
Right.
So we don't care if we're winning or losing. We just care that we're doing one or the other. We just need to make sure that things aren't equal and we're not on a flat footing.
Right. That's interesting. Yeah, it's definitely, because if it was all peace and everybody was, you know, able to forgive, then the universe would disappear, right? Boom. Yes. We're back to God and we're back to the one source.
Right.
You know, and that's an interesting thing to think about too. It's like, once we do all get to that level, eventually, 15 million years from now, whatever it is, however, if it ever happens, that we all just, this whole place just disappears, because it's nothing but a projection of our minds. And science is starting to, like, say things back, some of these things, like with the quantum theories and things. I'm not super well versed on it, so I'm not going to talk about it, but
there's one study like that I want to share. So I started reading Holographic Universe by Michael Talbot.
Okay.
And it's about the fact that, and now a quick detour, when Raleigh and I read Cosmos and Psyche by Richard Tarnas, we learned that new paradigms emerge spontaneously in different parts of the world at the same time.
Okay.
And the book describes that as being the result of a new, like, the universe is rolling forward in a way. People don't realize that they're on the same ball that's rolling. And so when the ball is facing a certain direction, there's different areas of the world that are facing that same direction now. Like when we move from the Pisces to, I think it's Aquarius that's after that.
Yeah.
Everybody spontaneously starts thinking, acting, and speaking and behaving differently, not realizing that they've shifted into a new way.
Right.
For some cosmic clock. But they would think it's just a coincidence. And then there's a modern philosopher named Rupert Sheldrake, who explains that when a monkey learns a skill, simultaneously other monkeys on different islands with no communication know the same skill.
Right.
He calls it morphic resonance.
Yeah.
And because the consciousness of the monkeys operates like a field, not as separate particles, one monkey learning something means that monkeys have learned something.
Right.
So that detour was just to say a really interesting example of that phenomenon, whether it's an astrological phenomenon or it's just because when one particle in consciousness learns something, others do in that same field.
Yeah.
I don't know which explanation is closer to the truth, but an interesting example of that is that a major neuroscientist and a major physicist at the same time developed holographic theories of understanding their fields.
Interesting.
The physicist was Bohm, and I don't remember the neuroscientist's name.
Right.
Holographic Universe by Michael Talbot, if anyone wants to go find out for themselves.
Yeah.
The part of the brain realization was, so it had been assumed for a long time that new information is stored physically in the brain, and that if you could cut out the part of the brain where somebody learned some specific thing, they would forget that thing or forget how to do that thing. You could cut out the language center, they wouldn't be able to speak.
Right. Lobotomies. No.
Right.
Sorry,
Yeah,
bad
dude.
joke.
Take back the good old
But,
days.
yeah.
Dude. Like, lobotomies. We had it figured out, and we got all PC.
We were so good at it.
So, holograms had been invented at this time. I believe this was the 60s.
Okay.
Maybe a little earlier or a little later, whatever.
Right.
And holograms have been invented, and holograms are lasers being shot at, I can't remember the material that the pattern is made out of, but there's a pattern that's very fine that's etched into this material, and then when lasers are shot at it,
Yeah.
the lasers reflect off of it in a way that creates an image when they bounce off of other lasers.
Right.
That's a very stupid summary, but the point is that thing that they bounce off of,
Yeah.
if you cut a piece off of it, it doesn't give you a piece of the image. It gives you the image, but lower resolution. And so the material that it's reflected
It's like
off
a
of,
fractal.
yeah, operates in that kind of fractal way,
Yeah.
where it still gives you the whole image, but it's lower resolution. So what this scientist decided to do was, God rest his soul, take a bunch of rats and cut out different parts of every brain of all these different rats.
Word.
And what he found was that the rats did not forget how to do anything. They still operated exactly the same, just slower. So
Okay.
they were the same rat but lower resolution,
Interesting.
which
Right.
led him to the realization that the brain is not a physical mechanism that stores information in certain wrinkles like we're
Yeah.
told in school. The brain operates like a hologram. At the same time, David Bohm, for reasons I can't even summarize stupidly,
Right.
realized that the universe is better construed as a hologram than in any other way.
Interesting.
And part of what makes the holographic theories of reality so sound to me is that their advocates tend to call it the holographic analogy rather than the holographic theory of reality, because they know that every theory of reality is a relative way of us describing the way that things are, or even the
Right.
way that things ought to be. And I say ought to be because if we realized the universe was a hologram, we wouldn't create suffering, because we would realize that we are the mind that has forgotten it is creating the suffering.
Right.
So it's more like the way that reality could be than the way that reality is as we experience it now. And it's not a description of ultimate reality. It's a map that allows us to grow closer to ultimate reality. Whereas if you talk to like a Newtonian physicist who's still thinking about things in a particle form, they'll act like that's ultimate. Like,
Right.
no, it's billiard balls. Or,
Yeah.
no, okay, we know now that there's quantum fields that mysteriously manifest as forces and particles, but that's it. Like,
Right.
that's the way that it is. They don't talk about it like it's an analogy for ultimate reality.
Right.
But the holographic community seems to, which
Interesting.
gives it more precedent to me.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that was one scientific
Okay.
example.
And another thing that, like, the monkey thing that you're talking about, how
Yeah,
one
morphic
monkey learned the
resonance.
thing, and well, it's like with a human example is the light bulbs, right? Like 6 different people at the same time came up with light bulbs. You know, across the world, it's not just Thomas Edison and Nikola Tesla. There was like 4 other people or 5. You know, there was a few other people who actually did it. But that's just a small example.
Interesting.
But then, as we were talking, I kind of started to think about the instant that the Course talks about, or the holy instant, which is just the moment that we turned away. And in that moment, the disappearance of the universe says that that's when the Big Bang happened. Boom, everything shot out. And then how everything's already happened. It's done. We've already turned back to God. This instant is over. But when it talked about the Big Bang and there being one set of like, it's like one direction, right? If there's one thing, then there's no. So Big Bang is one instance, everything goes out. Then there's one solution to that instance, right? That it's gonna go out into that way. So like I can't do anything about the way that it's going forward, nor could I have ever done anything about what it's doing to go past or in the past, right? And that helped so much, kind of realizing that it's all, you know, it just it has its one direction, you know, not the Harry Styles one direction, but it has its one direction of the universe, and we can't really do anything about it, and that helps so much with the forgiveness. And one of the things that I had read in some book about Buddhism was that can you do anything about it? No. Then you shouldn't worry. Can you do something about it? yes, then you also shouldn't worry, right? Like, if there's nothing you can do, then sweet. My hands are tied. I can't do anything. If there is something I can do, I'm going to do that thing, and there's no reason for me to fret or worry. And it's kind of in that same kind of sense, like, well, there's nothing I can do because tomorrow already happened as yesterday happened. And it's so simple. That's what I really love about this book and this whole thing is that the idea of it is so simple, right? That forgiveness is what's going to lead us forward, and not like some sort of spiritual evolution. Because I was on that a bit, like, oh, we have to learn our lessons, blah, 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 blah. But what does learning our lessons mean? Does it mean just going through hard stuff and then, oh, cool, so like might have learned like some bit of wisdom through that, but what does that wisdom lead to if we're not forgiving the thing that happened? And it's so interesting that really is what it is, right? Is the forgiveness bit. Like that's how Jesus healed the people that he healed. Your sins are now forgiven. Get up and walk, or whatever it was that he said, right? The forgiveness is like just such a huge piece of it,
right?
But it's so simple.
Yeah.
Yet so hard because we're so attached. It's so attached. We want to get angry, like you were saying. You want to get angry. You're making that conversation in your head earlier. You're like, man, blah, 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 blah. But it's like, well, it already happened, and that instance didn't happen, right? And here we all are in this, like, big, giant projection of our ego that, that's what...
So the Course encourages us to continue living a normal life rather than abandoning our life in favor of some kind of lazy half existence. And one perspective on that would be that it still wants us to learn lessons from the things that we do as we go.
Right.
But I think but another interpretation is that it is setting us up to approach life in a manner that will always detangle us from life rather than tangling us more into life.
Right.
Because it's saying, so, when you encounter something and it bugs you, forgive it. Do that with every single thing that you encounter, as the Course teaches you truer ways to think about reality. Like, for example, the Course describes any remedy for yourself that involves anything physical as magic. Yeah. Because you're falsely ascribing value to something that is made of matter, and matter isn't real. So you think, oh, if I drink this, then something will happen. Oh, if I take this pill, something will happen. Oh, if I get a massage, something will happen. All of these physical things happening that we think affect us. We are allowing mind, which is the only thing that has any power whatsoever because it's projecting the whole mess, to be influenced by matter, which means that really what we're doing is using mind to ascribe false power to what we call matter, and then really just curing ourselves with whatever we think. And so it'll continually stress ideas like that. Like, it will re-reference them. Remember, if using a medication to helps you for now, and keep doing it, because you don't want to react against the fear of considering it real by not taking it. Right. Let it be real for now, but just notice over time that it's not the medication that's helping you. Right. It's the power that you falsely ascribe to the medication that's really helping you. You're translating real power into false power, and then taking the false power and then using real power to help yourself, and you don't even need to do that in the first place. Yeah. And so you're reading the book and you're rethinking things, or miracles are never under an individual's control. Miracles are always the result of an individual being in such a state of surrender that time is corrected and collapsed through them by spirit in ways that they have no direct control over. So anything that we choose to do, if we develop an extrasensory gift like astral projection and we use that to help somebody, they will perceive that as a miracle if they're not informed enough to understand that that's just a subtle operation. Right. In the same way that I can move this right here. But we should not continue to let ourselves be fooled into thinking that anything we have control over is miraculous, because it isn't. Yeah. Miracle occurs when the individual surrenders to what is eternal, and the eternal spontaneously acts through us, never to cause awe, but only to initiate healing, to bring unity. Right. So as you're reading it and you're rethinking all these things, at the same time, everything that you encounter, you're forgiving. So it's not like, oh, I'm going to go out, I'm going to get a job, and if I get treated like crap, I'm going to learn about how to stick up for myself in the future.
Right.
It's like, no, we're not learning lessons like that
Right.
anymore. We're going to go there and we're going to forgive by noticing that it doesn't matter, that the person's temporary, we're temporary, the whole thing's a projection. Right. It's going to end one day. And not only am I projecting them causing me the harm, and I kind of want to experience that because it just makes life feel so damn crunchy when somebody mistreats me. There's that
separation, yeah.
Then that guy's also projecting me because having somebody to bully makes him feel so significant, like he exists.
Right.
Both projecting each other.
Yeah.
So you're just noticing that as you go. If you react against the circumstances of your life by sitting on a park bench instead of going to work, you're so afraid of what might happen at work because you think it's real that you think you're safer sitting on a park bench.
Yeah.
So you're still treating it like it's real.
Right.
So it's basically saying, as you go, the only lesson you're learning now is that none of it's real. And you're learning that lesson by forgiving, which will always give you a life that has less friction and less tension.
For sure.
Because you're in a state of forgiveness. So it's always going to make your circumstances better, while at the same time awakening you from your circumstances and demonstrating to the people around you that there's a such thing as operating from an eternal order of reality that doesn't count and hold grudges and all that stuff.
Right.
I think that's why it says to continue living your life normally. Not because there's anything to learn from the circumstances, but because that's the playing field on which you practice the repeated simple idea that forgiveness and letting go is the way.
Yeah. You mentioned correct. You said the word correct. And it made me think about when it talks about how sins are not something to be punished, right? They're something to be corrected. Like that, and that's what it's, we're on our path away from God. And then it's just the small little corrections, boom, 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 that the forgiveness allows us to make. And I thought that was a really, really, really good point of forgiveness, that it's about the corrections, not righting the wrongs, right? It's not righting the wrongs. It's not this, that, and the other. It's just a nice little correction, like, hey, boom, you're on the right track again. You're it's okay.
Right.
Like, don't fret too much over what happened. Don't attach and tangle yourself in, as you said too, like get tangled up in all the things.
Yeah.
Because that's where it hurts. I had a dream the other day it was really interesting, about being tangled up in I would like look at somebody, this is my interpretation of the dream now, I would look at somebody and then I would become that person and then go down, like as if I was judging that person, and then become them and live their storyline in this weird way and then split off from them again and then live their storyline again. And it's almost like, right, like me judging them is attaching to their life and their everything, and then now my bit of ego is now attached to following them. That judgment is attached to following them to see if that judgment's true, right? And it's not. We can't judge anybody, right?
Yeah.
Like the judgment is that bit of separation. It shows us that like there's that guy who's different. There's that girl who's different. There's that, I'm not like that.
Right. If I'm coming home, I have a neighbor across the street who loves to shoot the shit and just say outrageous things to each other while we're walking in and out of the house.
Right.
If he shouts at me from across the street and I don't feel like bantering with him, I can just not respond. He doesn't take it personal. It's just me saying like, oh, I don't want to play right now.
Yeah.
If he shouts something, I shout back. I'm saying like, oh, I want to play right now. Like let's shoot the shit. Let's banter back and forth. It's like the same thing when you see somebody doing something that's wrong. You can either choose to play the game or not play the game.
Right.
You can go like, that's so wrong. What you're doing is wrong.
Right.
Which is basically saying, I want to play. You're throwing the ball back to them. They've thrown you a ball and you're throwing it back to them and going, okay, let's play. You do something wrong and I'll point my finger at you and go, you're so fucking wrong.
Yep.
And then we can do that back and forth.
Yep.
Whereas forgiveness is like saying, I don't want to play.
Right.
And so the course approach is like, every time a game comes up, just lovingly decline to play the game. Just don't play the game.
Absolutely.
There's still the eternal game of letting go. The game of not playing the game is a game in itself.
Yeah.
And that's the only game left. It's like, no, I don't want to play. No, we can exchange love because that's symbolic of the state that we are trying to reverse back into.
Right.
I've stopped thinking in the spiritual journey since this train of thought as moving from where I'm at to a forward result that's better than this one.
Right.
like I'm on a road driving a car and I want to get to the destination. I've started thinking of it more like I'm in a house that I built and I'm just slowly backing out of the house, backing right out the front door.
Right.
Like, okay, I don't need to watch TV anymore. I don't need to cook food in the kitchen anymore. I don't need to read the books in the bedroom anymore.
Yeah.
I'm just backing out of the house. And it sounds kind of nihilistic because it's like, well, we're supposed to strive for things. We're supposed to make goals and set them.
Right.
But it's a wheel. Like, it's not...
Right.
You can get on a hamster wheel. You can go 5 miles an hour. You can go 10 miles an hour. You can go 50,000 million trillion miles an hour. You're going on the same wheel.
Right.
Like, whereas stepping off of the wheel takes almost no effort, but such a dramatic shift in perspective that it's humbling. It's like, I just literally turn to the right and take like a couple of steps and I'm off.
Right.
What if I take 50,000 forward? You'll be nowhere. You'll just be doing the same exact thing.
Exactly.
And I was asking a friend recently who's a mindfulness teacher about how we know whether a system is designed to keep us on the wheel or get us off the wheel. And it was one of those conversations where you talk to somebody who you thought knew something, but then you really get down to it with them and you're like, oh, you don't know. Like you don't know.
Right.
You have that conversation with a pastor or a mindfulness teacher or whoever, and you really get down to the nitty gritty with them, and they just get defensive, and you realize, oh my God, you don't know shit. Like, what am I doing?
Yeah.
Where he was saying that his theory is that enlightenment is uniting what's highest with what's lowest. Physical matter is like the grossest substance, the most blunt. Right. And awareness is the subtlest substance. So if you unite awareness with matter, then you've enlightened because you've linked what's lowest with what's highest, which creates wholeness, and wholeness is enlightenment. And I'm like, okay, so there's a ladder, right? There's a spectrum. I'm thinking this through as I'm talking to him.
Right.
There's a ladder. There's a spectrum. The spectrum of consciousness, as Ken Wilber calls it, and it goes from gross, blocky substances to very, very fine, high vibratory quantum substances. And you can try to get from the bottom of that ladder to the top of that ladder. But if you take a ladder and you bend it around and you connect the top rung with the bottom rung, what shape do you get?
Circle.
A hamster wheel.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Right.
Every step of the hamster wheel.
Right.
You think, oh, I just need to go up the wheel. Like, I just need to go up the ladder.
Right.
Or I need to link the highest part of the ladder with the lower part of the ladder.
Right.
And the Course does not describe in any way that we are trying to move up a spectrum.
Nope.
Or move forward to some better destination.
Right.
Because it's not written in a linear paradigm.
Right.
It's saying we're building the hamster wheel as we run on it, pretending that we're going forward, not because we want to make progress.
Yeah.
But because we want to avoid recognizing that we're doing the whole thing to ourselves.
Right.
And I started thinking about a lot of the mainstream religious systems. I've always wanted to be happy-go-lucky and think that every religious system is pointing to the same reality and that reality is God and that's a good thing. But I started rethinking it. I'm like, no, the Course is using Christian language to explain the truth. And I think you could use any religion as your language and explain the truth. But the religious systems are man-made defense mechanisms against God.
Yeah.
Because if we say God wants to punish us so much that he has to punish the most perfect person the most because of what we've done, we can always feel comfortable in the illusion that we're striving forward, we're trying to get somewhere, we matter, but he matters the most, which means we matter a little. Right. As long as somebody matters the most, we don't matter equally, and we don't have to wake up.
Right.
Jesus says in a course, in the Course in Miracles, he says, we have everything. I have nothing that you don't have. The difference between us for now is that I have nothing else.
Right.
But we take that story about him realizing the truth and go, well, he realized it, but he was unique.
Right.
Obsessed with the uniqueness
his
of
body
Jesus.
was special. He was the Son of God. He was the incarnation of God on our planet, blah, 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 blah. Yeah, all that. But when I really like it when it talks about how God is, right? There is nothing else. God is.
Yeah,
period.
God is.
God is, period. Because there's no game, there's no game to get to God.
Right.
Right? There's no game. It's just backing away from the game.
Right.
And realizing that there's nothing. God is, and that's it. And like the punishable the God that punishes. Yeah, it is just it's just a projection of so many people's egos. I used to think on that same level that all spiritual teachings were leading to the same place, and that God would talk to us all in different ways because these people are like this and we're like this and these people are like that, and but really it's not that way, because any spiritual path, if you follow a book, has been written by humans, right? Like in the essence, and it's been changed over time and changed over time and changed over time, and every religion says, oh, our book has not been changed at all. But it's like, well, I think I've heard that same thing about the Bible, and I've heard that same thing about the Quran, but really none of it talks about how just backing away from the game, backing out, being like, okay, cool, I choose not to banter with this person today. And that's what really gets across in this book, is that it's just backing away from this reality that we think is reality, but it's non-reality, right? It's the non-reality behind everything, whereas reality is just perfect oneness, and that there's no duality. That's another thing that's kind of coming up in my brain right now. The duality is that separate, right? There's good and bad. There's this and that. Like, that's our illusion of separation, where there really is no separation, right? We're just a piece of God that broke off, saying like, we don't need you. Boom. We created our own place, this whole universe, so that we can prove the fact that we don't need God. Mm-hmm. But yet here we are in all of our struggles and in all the things. And, and if we just take that little step back, take a little breath, and like, whew, I don't have to play it. I don't have to get mad at this person today because they said something. I don't have to get mad at the guy who cut me off, or, even like in the deepest levels, right? The person who killed my mom. My mom's not dead and wasn't murdered, but like, it's just an example, right? Mm-hmm. But like, just the attachment to those, and how you said to move forward in life without like the struggle of like, oh, nothing matters. We don't have to move forward because nothing matters, because God is. But that's not the truth. And how the book says it, it's like, why not go through it, but forgive yourself, right? As you're going through it. Like, okay, cool. I understand that this path that I'm choosing is just a projection of my ego, and that's okay. It's okay.
Right.
As long as I'm not attached.
That's what I'm doing for now.
Yeah, and as long as I'm not attached to the result. If I get it, awesome, sweet. If I don't get it, awesome, sweet. I'm still here, and like, really the only thing that is God is. Yeah, it's
right.
Life-changing.
I was having a conversation with a friend about this train of thought, and a friend and his dad, actually. And the friend was telling me about a lucid dream. And when he realized that he was in a dream, he decided to manifest a red car. But as soon as the red car appeared, he was like, oh, shit, I'm in a dream. And he woke up.
Right.
And so I thought that applies to this train of thought in the sense that what we first do when we realize that it's a dream is we manifest what we want. That's the first thing that we want to do. It's like, well, if this is a dream, then I want to be X and Y in 1 year. We wake up in 1 year. We're like, holy shit.
Here I am.
Yeah, here I am. That was weird. But we don't benefit in any way from receiving the thing that we projected.
Right.
But at least we start to notice that we're in a dream, because we're living life with the knowledge that it's a dream. We are going to, if we realize it's a dream, the first thing we're going to do is drop the shitty parts. Right. It's like, okay, I'm going to drop all the constant conflict, constant worrying, anxiety. I'm going to drop fear, and it's mutually exclusive with love, according to the Course. So I'm just going to boost love. I'm going to cultivate love. I'm going to cultivate forgiveness, because it keeps me from being entangled in more illusion.
Right.
So I'm going to just ride love and forgiveness as my life gets better and better every day.
Yeah.
While keeping in mind that it's only getting better and better every day because it's not fucking real. Right. And I'm choosing to project it differently now.
Right.
So it's, Gary in an interview said that it's a path where you have your cake and eat it too. And I don't agree with that, because that's saying that there is a cake. He's saying, well, you can get what you want as you learn that it's not real. I think
Yeah.
it's like you can get what you want as you learn that it's not real so that you no longer want what you think you want.
Right.
The red car can wake you up. It wasn't the red car you were looking for. Unconsciously, you were trying to remember that you were in a dream.
Yeah.
The red car provided you with evidence that you are in a dream.
Right.
And so you chose to wake up from it.
Right.
So as we live our life, it's going to get smoother and smoother as we remember that that this is all fleeting, that these are all fake objects.
I kind of like that, where it is like as we manifest the dream, it's a evidence for us being in an actual dream.
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty interesting, because it's hard to grasp. Like me, I've led my life like, oh, look at all these things that I'm manifesting, you know, this career, this, that, this, the other. And I've listened to the signs of the universe, and I listened to the synchronicities and all the things. And when in reality it was just the ego pushing it forward, like, hey, you're in a dream. Here's what you want, and everything that you want inside your head is right there. Boom, boom, boom. But it is hard to like take that and be like, okay, let's just back away from the dream.
Right.
Right? Because we're like, all right, but we're supposed to go through it. You know, we're supposed to go through these paths. We're supposed to go down these things. We're supposed to learn these lessons and whatever. And that's the hardest thing for me generally with this path is forgiving myself for wanting those things, right? And for wanting to be attached to my separation, that my career is like this, you know. And so, yeah, it's been really interesting wrestling with that. Like, oh, I see these things that I want to move so-and-so, move to wherever, blah, 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 blah. But, like, should I just, like, back off? Right?
I've heard Kenneth Wapnick, who's presented in Disappearance of the Universe as the most authoritative teacher and A Course in Miracles. He passed away, but I saw an interview with him talking about manifestation and how some people who go through the Course take it as permission to manifest whatever they want, because if the whole universe is a projection by mind, then we can use our mind to create what we want. And he said that there's a sense in which the Course is saying the opposite thing. Because the manifestation culture, it says, since the universe is a holographic projection of mind, you should get whatever you want. The Course is saying, since the universe is a holographic projection of mind, you don't have to keep manifesting all of the bullshit that you are.
Right.
So it's less about what you should start manifesting and more about what you don't have to manifest anymore. It's like, hey, you're beating yourself in the back of the head with a hammer, and you don't even notice that you're doing it. You don't have to do that anymore.
Right.
As opposed to like, dude, you should make like the sexiest hammer in town. Like,
right.
You should bash yourself in the head with the hottest chick you can possibly think of.
Yeah.
Like, it was crazy. They brought up a quote from a Buddhist dude.
Okay.
Somebody had asked him what it was like to be celibate. He didn't masturbate. He didn't have sex.
Yep.
He didn't anything for decades.
I remember this one. Yeah.
And he said, "It's just fine. I'm coming all the time."
Yeah.
And it's crazy that he answered in that graphic way.
Right.
But Pursah and Arten were trying to explain to our puny minds, to Gary, that the experience that they have all the time eternally and without any separation, without any interruption, is higher than the peak of the greatest orgasm for us.
And it's all the time.
Yeah, it's never ending.
Yeah.
And we try to seek in drugs and sex and whatever in the red car these peak moments so that we can just reach up like fish getting air, just this little of heaven, and then swim back down into hell. And the Course, it says a few times in the Course, you think that I'm asking you to give up so much, and I'm not asking you to give up anything. I'm not asking you to give up anything. It's just like gently, repeatedly reminding, I'm not asking you to give anything up. God has absolutely no concept of sacrifice.
Right.
Sacrifice is an ego construct.
Right.
There's no such thing as trading something kind of good for something better. None of that matters.
Right.
Give up everything that doesn't matter so you can have the only thing that like Jesus
Give
saying.
Give up nothing for everything, right? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Like Jesus saying, we have everything. I have nothing you do not have. The difference between us for now is that I don't have anything else.
Yeah.
I have nothing except for everything.
Right.
And I'm asking you to give up the some things that you have, some of which bring you pain, some of which bring you fleeting glimpses of some pleasure.
Yeah.
In exchange for perfect pleasure constantly. And you're gripping it, thinking I'm asking you to give something away. That train of thought makes so much more sense than I've talked to Christians who believed that it was okay for their life to suck because life is just a test and then you have the good part is in heaven. Or the reincarnation theory that if you just behave better and better, then you'll have better and better incarnations and eventually you'll be liberated from the cycle of incarnation because you climb a ladder to the top. And I think people who have this understanding that the whole thing is a hologram and that backing out of is the answer probably existed in all of these religious cultures.
Right.
In glimpses. Like Kenneth Wapnick is the reincarnation of St. John of the Cross.
Okay.
Look up pictures of him. It's really interesting.
Okay.
That's from the same site that pointed out Gary Renard is the reincarnation of Thomas. And so I think they pop up everywhere. And I think you could probably say in Buddhist or Hindu or Christian terms what the Course and the Disappearance is saying.
Right.
But it's not exclusive to that. And it seems like the real teachers are trying to untangle us from our ideas rather than like...
Yeah, then get us all wrapped up in dogma.
Yeah.
And because that's just we believe this and this is what's right. We're separate from you.
Yeah.
Nope, we're not.
Yeah.
We're not separate. And you brought up reincarnation. Reincarnation was a Christian belief before 325 AD, before the Council of Nicaea and
Constantine.
Emperor Constantine and all that. So, yeah, it's really, like, I always thought about it like, are we ready to be with God? Like, if I were to die tomorrow, am I ready to be with God? No. How many people on this planet, if they were to die tomorrow, are they're ready to be with God?
About 20, according to Disappearance.
Yeah, right? Yeah. And that's, hopefully that number will get bigger as time goes on.
Right.
But yeah, it's, and the if we behave better, right? How you said that, if we behave better, but it's not about the behavior. It's about the forgiveness of the behavior. Mm-hmm. So, like, I love eating ice cream every night because it makes me feel this whatever, and it makes me feel separate, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
I got to forgive that I reached the ice cream to feel separate, to feel like those feelings, right? And that doesn't mean that I have to stop eating it tomorrow or whatever, but the more and more I'm like, oh, it's okay that's how you choose to interact with this universe, with this projection of ego. It's okay. Cool. Eventually
you'll lose interest in it.
Right. Eventually. Right.
Yeah.
I don't have to forgive myself after the fact. I forgive myself right as the thought comes up. I'm going to go to the store and buy me some ice cream. Boom. I forgive myself right then. I don't go to the store and buy myself ice cream.
Yeah.
Right. It's
Gary talks about how he breaks out when he eats candy bars. And Arten is responding to something else, but he says, by the way, try eating the candy bar without any guilt and you won't break out.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. It's that,
That's called the nocebo effect in psychology.
Interesting.
Like placebo, it's like you think it's going to cure you, so it does. Nocebo is the opposite. Like you think it's going to have some harmful effect, so it does.
Ah, that makes sense. Huh. But yeah, it's the same thing, right? Like,
yeah.
Ice cream's not going to hurt me if I go to Safeway tonight.
Right.
But I'm not going to. I got smoothies in my house.
Before we hopped on, we talked about how we were also going to touch on the usefulness of taking these ideas in bite-sized chunks instead of like trying to buffet on these ideas.
Yeah.
The first exercises in the course are to be practiced for 1 minute at a time for about 3 minutes or for about 3 times. And then once you get about a month in, it starts saying, like, do it 6 times. So I know that it turns up. I did the first month, started over because I liked it so much and read Disappearance and got a better framework for where it's going.
Right.
Then I did the first week, did the same thing again. Now I'm in the second week. So I haven't made it past that first 30 days. So I don't know if they get even more intensive later on. But I think that if you were to take the idea for the first day, for example, is to look at every object that your eye passes over and say, that does not mean anything. That glass of water does not mean anything. That book does not mean anything. And it's interesting, when I do it, I can feel myself clearing.
Right.
Like I had a hangover yesterday, and the exercise of the day was these meaningless thoughts are projecting a meaningless world. And as I said that, these meaningless thoughts are projecting a meaningless world, I felt my hangover clearing.
Yeah.
Because I could feel my attachment to it loosening. It's just like,
Right.
whatever. Like, oh, I
Right.
drank, so then this is the result. So now I
Right.
feel this way. So I'm
Yeah.
going to have this kind of day. And like,
Right.
just like, whatever. I don't care. And those exercises, if I took day one, for example, and I just decided I need to wake up as quickly as possible, so I'm just going to say this all day because nothing
Right.
means anything. So I go and all day I look at everything I see and I say, this doesn't mean anything, this doesn't mean anything, this doesn't mean anything. The belief that I need to wake up quickly is giving credit to linear time instead of allowing it to drop away gently.
Right.
So if I wake up today, that's better than waking up in 10 years.
Yeah.
That's giving time more credit than it deserves.
Right.
And B, the reason that I'm affirming to myself that nothing means anything is because I don't believe it. So I'm having a kind of internal argument with everything that I see.
Yeah.
No, that doesn't mean anything. No, it doesn't. No, it
Right.
doesn't.
Then you just become a schizophrenic living in a
Right.
world that doesn't exist, and
Exactly.
you're like, well, none of this is real. What do I do? What do I do? Yeah, that
Right.
large like fire hose. It's like the
Right.
trying to drink water out of a fire hose kind of thing, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Which tends to kill you.
Yeah, yeah,
And-
definitely.
And I'll just be bashing my head against everything I perceive.
Yeah,
Whereas the Course's approach is spend that 3 minutes noticing that things don't mean anything. And for the rest of the day, continue pretending that they do. What's the
Right.
fucking rush?
right.
What are you
Yeah,
rushing? What are you
Really.
What clock are you racing exactly?
yeah,
Pretend everything means something if that's what you want to do. And spend your 10 minutes a day on the Course
yeah.
and just allow yourself gently over time to notice that these things don't actually mean anything. Because it's only fear that triggers me to want to wake up more quickly and do the exercises more.
Right.
And it's only fear that would cause me to react against the perceived meaning of things by affirming to myself repeatedly that they don't exist. So the Course is really, really easy. I used to meditate up to an hour a day and read different
Right.
scriptures from different cultures, trying to connect the dots and all this stuff. And I realized that I was doing all of that because I had a future vision for myself of how enlightened I was going to be compared to other people.
Yep. Yep.
And that is an ego projection all the way through. The ego, it has an agenda in the same sense that if you lie about something 2 years ago, you lie to your spouse, you cheat on your spouse and you tell them that you were at work that day or whatever, then every time an opportunity to tell the truth about that comes up, you lie automatically without even thinking about it. You don't even process, am I going to come clean about that today or am I going to? You don't do that. You just
No,
lie.
right. It's just there. Yeah.
So we all have hundreds of lies swimming around in our consciousness that are ready to act on their own accord without us consciously processing it.
Right.
So they take on their own personalities. We create these characters and then we let them loose in ourselves.
Yep.
And we lie without ever noticing that we lie. And the ego is just the big version of that. So the ego is the personification or the agenda that exists because of the first mistake. The first mistake was to entertain the idea of separation.
Right.
So every single lie that we tell is an avatar of the agenda of the idea that we could be separate. So
Right.
it doesn't have an existence, but it has an effect in the dream. And we almost always act in service of it without noticing that that's what we're serving.
Right.
And you see Jesus saying stuff like that. Like, you think that you're serving God, you're serving the devil. In Aramaic, the devil basically meant the separation and the separator.
Yeah.
And so he's saying, you think that you're serving unity, you think you're serving ultimate reality, Allah. Really, you're serving, I don't remember the Aramaic word right now, but you're serving Satan, you're serving separation, you're serving division.
Yeah.
You don't know what you're serving. You have no idea what you're saying or doing.
Right.
Okay, but the reason I started on this rant was bite-sized chunks give us the ability to gradually step away without causing additional friction, but just dropping it away.
Right.
Was there anything else you wanted to say about that bite-sized approach?
Well, as you were saying that, it kind of, it goes back to the fractal thing, right? Like it's a little bit, a fractal image is the same image, but bigger and bigger and bigger, 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 then it makes a bigger picture, right?
Right.
Well, my brain's coming back to the prodigal son and the fall, right? It's all the separation, as you said, right? Like the devil is the separation. Well, the story of Satan is like, we don't need God. We can go do it ourselves and we can give the power to the humans and to be God, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
And then you got, the actual fall of the humans where he gives the apple to her to Eve, and then she bites it, and so does Adam, and blah 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 blah. And then you got the prodigal son, right? Well, that's the most basic version of that story, the prodigal son. And if you accept that part, then the other parts kind of get easier. Oh, we are just separating away from God. That's all it is, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, with taking things like, I guess for me, the bite-sized chunks is the forgiveness that helps is forgiving the little things. Forgiving the little things about whatever it is makes forgiving the bigger things easier. The more and more that you choose forgiveness, regardless of what you're choosing to forgive, like if you had problems with your parents or you this, that, and the other growing up that you're really angry about, that anger tends to lead into like, oh, I dropped this bottle. I'm so stupid. I'm like, boom, oh, I'm so angry.
Yeah.
Like, oh, well, okay. I dropped this bottle. Oh, man. Cool.
Mm-hmm.
Sweet. I'm going to bend down and pick it up.
Yeah.
And then I'm not going to attach to all that anger and that whatever. And then that'll lead into, cool, I'm not angry at myself for dropping the bottle. So when I go and drive and somebody runs out in front of me and I have to slam on my brakes, it's easier for me to forgive that person because I'm not already angry from dropping the bottle. And then over here, over time, right, then maybe we can get to that point where we forgive our parents for whatever it is that they did, or
Right.
somebody who did something larger to us, and it's that little bit of like that feels fractal because it's all the same thing. It's all the illusion of separation. Whether it's I dropped the bottle and now we're separate. I'm not holding it, right? I think that was a stretch, but
I get what you're saying.
You get what I'm saying, right? And then like. That person caused me to do the thing because they're a separate person from me and blah, 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 blah. And then now my parents, they hurt me so bad. So, yeah, it's those little pieces, the little chunks of forgiveness is really where we start to get the bigger ones. And it even says that in the Disappearance. I'm sure it says it in the course, but I haven't gotten that far yet, only in chapter 1. And, yeah, it says that over time, choosing the Holy Spirit, the path of forgiveness is easier.
Yeah.
It just gets easier and easier and easier the more that you practice it.
Right.
And the easiest way to practice it is in the little stuff.
Right. Right before I found the course, for a couple weeks, I had started doing this exercise where I had a prayer rug. This was something I had done for months. I had a prayer rug, and I would recite the Lord's Prayer in Aramaic, doing these physical exercises that may or may not date back to the Syriac church that was in the first century speaking the real words that he had said and whatnot. And it was the best way that I knew to try to be close to Jesus. Like, what is the closest I can get to actually sitting down with Jesus without a filter of tradition and culture and lineage between me and him, just being with him. So,
right.
Well, I can make the effort to learn the prayer that he taught in the language that he taught it, learn the Hebrew alphabet, learn the meanings of each of the characters, learn how the characters string together to create the deepest meanings in each word. That's the best I can do to express my devotion to Jesus. And then take at least 3 times, not at least, I'd skip days, but generally 1 to 3 times a day, sit down on a prayer rug that I devote to this, do the prayer, and just try to take the time to open up and notice the presence of Jesus and its willingness to encounter me. And what I had started doing for a couple of weeks, I had also learned how this was an Edgar Cayce thing, how the different lines of the Lord's Prayer apply to different chakras. So I would apply untangling from, temptation to my sacral chakra, like cool my sexual fires so that I'm not repressing, but I'm not grasping.
Right.
Just cool me and fill me with holiness. Open my heart so that I have an indiscriminate love. Please clear my perception so that I can see the way that you see, applying to the third eye. To the root chakra, give me a trust that I'll always be provided for, not having to strive thinking that I am in control of whether I have sustenance, but just knowing that all of this is created by God and I'll always be provided for. Of course, has a different perspective on whether the universe is created by God exactly. But the point is, I would get to the crown chakra, and I would hold up my hands like a cup, and I would bow and I would pray to Jesus, can I please have just like a drop of your holiness?
Right.
Will you please put just one drop of your holiness in me? Because I know that one microscopic drop of Jesus is better than a huge amount of anything.
Right.
And I know I'm not conditioned for any more than a drop. Can I have just a drop?
Yeah.
And I would hold up my hands and then I would pour it into my head and I would feel these big tingles just down my body from the top of my head.
Mm-hmm.
And it was the most authentic way I had ever found to try to open myself up to Jesus.
Right.
Because even though we know at any moment we can just open to Jesus,
Right.
we have so many internal barriers between ourselves and that free choice we can always make
Yeah.
that we need to trick ourselves into thinking, well, maybe if I say it in Aramaic, or maybe if
Right.
it's a rug and I set aside this time, and it was the closest I had ever gotten. And I only did that for a couple weeks, and then I found the course. And when I found the course, I was like, "Thank you. This is the answer to my prayer."
Right.
And I only need a drop. I just need a drop every day. I just
Right.
need this 2 pages of reading and this 1 sentence exercise that I do a couple of times a day.
Right.
I know I don't need to sit here for 45 minutes in this,
Right.
because, like you said, a fractal is the same pattern,
Yep.
whether it's tiny or huge. It's the same pattern. I don't need a bunch of Jesus. I just need a little bit of perfect, undiluted,
Right.
just perfect Jesus. Just a little bit every day.
Yep.
And there's no rush beyond that. There's no hurry to get to some outcome where, okay, now I'm like 80% like Jesus and I'm so close. Now I could
Right,
get into
yeah.
not the terrestrial, but celestial heaven. Now I could,
Yeah.
like, all of these levels and levels and levels and levels. It's like, just give me a drop every day. And I'm 100% certain that I'll get with you eventually. And
Right.
it doesn't matter if it's a day or 100 years.
Right. Or
And-
100 lifetimes.
Yeah.
You know, in other senses.
Yeah.
Continue.
And whatever, because I know that I'm gliding downhill if I'm just doing this.
Right.
I know if I'm doing these exercises that help me forgive,
Yeah.
and I know if I'm reading on how to straighten my thoughts on what a miracle is, what healing is, what love is, what a relationship is, what forgiveness is, and I'm clearing out my thoughts and I'm forgiving attachments and resentments, I know I'm on the way. I don't care if it's a reincarnation thing or a heaven thing or how long it takes. It
Right.
doesn't matter.
Right.
Just give me a little drop every day.
Right. And we'll get there eventually.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's one of the things that I really liked about that is the patience. That's another thing that's in Buddhism as well. Well, if not today, then there's tomorrow. And if not tomorrow, then there's the next day.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and so on and so forth. You know, it's like, it's okay.
Yeah.
It's okay as long as we're doing that little piece that we need to. Yeah.
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 Anything else you want to share from this book?
It's really been eye-opening for me. Like I've been working on forgiveness for a long time because I knew that that was something that I needed to do because I was holding on to a lot of things in my past that had happened. And I kind of understood it a little bit, but once I got into this book and really dove to it, like, it helps much more. Like, I got to a point where I would, you know, a year ago I went through something that it took me months and months to forgive. And then recently I also went through something else that really only took a couple days, like, for me to really forgive and start to move forward. So I feel like I was finally ready for this understanding of forgiveness. But after that, it helps because I was forgiving those things, right? But this just helps let go of the rest of it.
Yeah.
Of the rest of those, like, okay, it's still hard. It's still hard on a daily basis, you know, but this book gave me tools to then fight the hardness of the forgiveness.
Right.
Gave me just a little bit more of what I needed.
Yeah.
And that's one thing that I really, really appreciated about this book, and I know I'm going to appreciate about the course as I get through it, is the tools that it gives, because they're so simple, and the understanding of it is so simple. So, yeah,
Right.
It's about, yeah.
One thing that one more thing I want to share that we could close with is New Year's, beginning of 2023. I was praying for some hint as to what God wants to do in my life this year, how I can grow closer to Jesus this year. And what I heard was, this year I'm going to soften your heart with desert wisdom. Well, my favorite book was Desert Wisdom by Neil Douglas Klotz.
Okay.
And Brooke, who was my partner at the time, got me a copy of Desert Wisdom signed by the author.
Nice.
And I'm about to start a master's where that author is going to advise me on translation theories and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And part of my inspiration for moving to Phoenix, I already wanted to, but I moved to Phoenix for a few months this year, and I was like, okay, God's going to soften my heart with Desert Wisdom. It's about Desert Wisdom by Neil Douglas Klotz. It's about moving to Phoenix. That's a big desert. I ordered Wisdom of the Desert Fathers by Thomas Merton.
Okay.
I'm like, I'm going to go out in the desert. And, I had all these ideas about like, okay, I know what this means for sure. Like, my heart's going to be softened with Desert Wisdom. Desert Wisdom by Neil Douglas Klotz is largely about heart-based exercises that emerge from Middle Eastern spiritual traditions.
Okay.
Like Sufism and Kabbalah and Christian mysticism. And what's the crazy long name that sounds like the water person from Zelda? Zoroastrianism?
Oh,
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
You thought there wasn't going to be an answer. You thought this crossword puzzle's going nowhere. It existed.
All right.
Okay, and that one, Persian stuff, desert stuff, right? It's the Middle East. I'm like, oh, I know what this is about. And then Phoenix didn't work out. I kind of lost interest in that book, and I didn't really know where that was going. And then I encountered the answer to that when I read this book. Pursah says, would you like to know, because Pursah was Thomas, would you like to know what Jesus told Thomas? It says, then Thomas was taken away and he was told 3 things. Mm-hmm. Would you like to know what they are? And he told Gary. So we'll close with this because this line is fire.
Yeah.
You live in a desert where mirages are your rulers and tormentors. Father did not make the desert, and your home is still with him. To return, forgive your brother, for only then do you forgive yourself.
Right. Yeah.
So sick.
So, yeah, that's perfect.
Night school.
Yeah, night school.